Every day, police officers make arrests, but the officer's job shouldn't stop at the arrest or even at the papering process. Since the American criminal justice system has as one of its fundamental principles that all arrested persons are innocent until proven guilty, the vast majority of arrestees will be released back into the community until their cases are resolved in court. That's where we come in. I'm Cliff Keenan, formerly with the MPD in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I am now the Deputy Director of the D.C. Pretrial Services Agency. We supervise and provide services for those defendants who are released back into the community pending their trial. For those of you who don't know, the D.C. Pretrial Services Agency is a federal law enforcement agency. We are an independent entity within the Court Services and Offender Supervision Agency, also known as CSOSA. While CSOSA supervises parolees and probationers, Pretrial supervises defendants who are released pending trial. We have about 220 pretrial service officers who supervise about 5,500 defendants at any given time. We begin the process by interviewing virtually every person arrested in D.C., and then we do an investigation into the arrestee's prior criminal history, and we verify his or her demographic information such as residence and employment. Depending upon that investigation and today's charge, the pretrial services officer will make a recommendation to the court concerning the arrestee's detention or release, and what conditions of release should be placed on the defendant if he or she is to be released. In D.C., the law requires that all persons shall be released under the least restrictive conditions, and a person may only be detained if the court finds that he or she may flee or poses a danger to any other person or the community. D.C. Code Title 23, Section 1321 specifies the full array of release conditions that a judge can place upon a person who is to be released pending trial. These include that the defendant not commit any crime while on release, not possess firearms or other weapons, undergo substance abuse and/or mental health treatment, that the person be drug tested on a regular basis, seek or maintain a job or education, report to a designated law enforcement agency like Pretrial Services, and/or abide by a curfew or stay away from a particular place or person. But we need your help in making these recommendations. We want to make the most appropriate recommendations that will help assure community safety and the defendant's return to court. But we often can't do that without having the kind of information that you, the arresting officer, can provide to us. That's why your job shouldn't stop at the arrest. While you discuss the case with the prosecutor during papering, you should be thinking about what conditions of release should be requested if the defendant is going to be released pending future court appearances. This could be a valuable tool for you in implementing your customized community policing strategies in your respective PSAs. Perhaps the defendant is a chronic shoplifter in your PSA's business area. Requesting a stay away from that area would be both appropriate and useful to your community. If the defendant is suspected of breaking into cars during the midnight shift, a curfew would make sense. If you help the prosecutor persuade the judge that certain conditions of release are needed, and the judge imposes these conditions, the defendant just might pay attention and not engage in any criminal conduct. That would be another significant contribution you will have made to your community. But what happens if the defendant doesn't abide by the court-ordered conditions? Depending upon the nature of the violation, several things can happen. For instance, if the defendant tests positive for drugs, the judge may order the defendant to go into drug treatment. If the defendant's misconduct is serious enough, however, the judge can even revoke the defendant's release and detain the defendant until his next court date. But suppose you had requested a stay away from your particular area in your PSA and was ordered as a release condition by the judge. If you see the defendant in the stay away area, you should confirm that the stay away is still in place. You can do this by checking through Justice, the prison portal, the dispatcher, or by calling pretrial services at 202-585-7030. Once confirmed, you have probable cause to arrest the defendant for contempt of court, because that is what violating a court's order actually is. The prosecutor's office will decide if the contempt charge will be papered, and if it is, that will be an additional charge for which the defendant will be held accountable. Not too long ago, a D.C. defendant, Anthony Seals, who had an extensive criminal record for committing thefts and burglaries, was charged with receiving stolen property felony. He was released with a condition to stay away from a 5-block radius of 6th and 8th Streets Northwest. About 15 weeks after his release, Mr. Seals was arrested by an MPD officer while he was standing in a bus stop in the 400 block of 8th Street. The officer had recognized him as the subject of the stay away. He was charged with contempt for violating the stay away. He ended up pleading to RSP misdemeanor as well as the contempt charge. He was sentenced to 150 days for the RSP, but he also received 3 years for the contempt of court for having violated the stay-away. That sentence was upheld on appeal, notwithstanding Mr. Seal's claim that it was harsh. The Court of Appeals found that Mr. Seal's record of habitual offenses and disobedience of court orders presented adequate support for the sentence imposed by the trial judge. As I said at the beginning, your job shouldn't end with the arrest. Please be thinking about what conditions of release would be appropriate to request of the court if the defendant is to be released, conditions that will assure community safety, as well as the defendant's reappearance in court for future hearings. This can be a valuable part of your customized community policing strategy, but we need to be working together in order for it to be successful. Thanks for listening, and be careful out there.